Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. Ready to have our minds bent a little? Today, we're going to be looking at something both fascinating and kind of unnerving: visual metacognition. Or, well, more specifically, what happens when it goes a bit off the rails.
Yeah, it's really interesting how we kind of just assume our senses, especially sight, just work. But in this deep dive, we're really diving into those times when our brain, well, might not be giving us the full picture. And that's a phenomenon called anosognosia.
So, imagine being colorblind, right? Seeing the world in shades of gray. But here's the thing. You genuinely believe that everyone else is seeing those same shades of gray. It's wild to think about. And what's even more interesting is that the research we're looking at today is a collaboration. Researchers at Georgia Tech, MIT, Oxford, and even Harvard Medical School are all working together on this.
It really is amazing, this research. It challenges the idea that we have, perfect insight into our own experiences. We tend to think, hey, I know myself best, right? But our brains are really good at keeping secrets, especially when it comes to how we see.
Okay, so let's break this down a bit. Anosognosia. It's more than just not realizing you need glasses, yeah? What exactly are we talking about when we say visual hiccups?
Oh, yeah, it goes way beyond just needing glasses. Anosognosia, it covers a whole bunch of visual problems, from really extreme stuff like Anton syndrome, where someone's completely blind but they don't know it, to things that are more, common.
Hold on, wait. You mean totally blind? But they've no clue. How is that even possible?
Right. It's a hard one to wrap your head around. So in Anton syndrome, what's happening is that the brain is basically creating this visual reality that doesn't match what's actually there. But you also see anosognosia in things like hemianopia. That's where someone loses sight in half of their visual field. Or conditions like color blindness, achromatopsia, even glaucoma, and age-related macular degeneration. We call that AMD sometimes.
So someone with hemianopia, are you saying they might only see half the food on their plate? Or someone with AMD might just not notice if their central vision is blurry?
Exactly. And get this, it's way more common than you might think. Studies show that more than half, over half, of people with hemianopia, at first they have no idea that they've lost part of their vision.
Wow, really? Over half. So they're bumping into things, missing entire conversations, and it's just what they don't even notice.
Yeah, in those early stages, it's not even happening, and it gets even wilder. For AMD, that number jumps up to, get this, 98%. Almost everyone with AMD, when they first start having problems, they're completely unaware of it. It's like their brain is saying, everything's fine, nothing to see here.
That is both incredible and also a little creepy. But how? How can our brain just, erase something as important as sight?
Well, there are a few key reasons why this might happen, why our brain might pull off this disappearing act. One of them is this thing called filling in.
Like how our brains fill in our blind spots, the ones that everyone has naturally.
Exactly that. It's super efficient, but sometimes it can, go a bit off script. Take Anton syndrome, for example. This filling in mechanism, combined with the brain not being able to distinguish what it's seeing from, memories or imagination, it leads to these situations where people describe seeing things, in detail, that just aren't there.
So it's like their brains are creating, a kind of hallucination to make up to the fact that they can't actually see. That's both incredible and a little spooky. But what about the other stuff, like hemianopia, AMD? What's going on there?
Well, that's where the way our brains form expectations comes in. Think about those videos, those slow change blindnesses videos. Something changes in the background, but it happens so slowly you totally miss it.
Oh, yeah. It's like those magic tricks where something vanishes and you're like, how did they do that?
Exactly. Now imagine that same idea, but with vision loss. If it happens slowly, like with glaucoma or AMD, our brains, they're amazing at adapting. They slowly adjust what they expect to see. So we don't even notice the vision loss because our baseline for what's normal, it's shifted with the changes.
So basically, our brains are slowly tricking us into thinking everything is fine. Pretty sneaky. But you said earlier that sometimes it's actually easier to notice if you only lose part of your vision, not all of it. That seems, kind of counterintuitive.
It does, right. But think of it this way. If you still have some normal vision, your brain, it can compare the two. It can see the difference between the working part and the part that's not working, and that tells it something's wrong. But with complete vision loss, there's nothing to compare to, so it's harder for the brain to realize there's a problem.
So it's like the brain is better at noticing a glitch in the system than it is at noticing that the whole system crashed.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so we've got filling in and expectation adaptation. What's the third reason our brains might be keeping us in the dark about vision problems?
All right, this one goes even deeper into how self-aware we are. It's all about metacognition.
Metacognition,
Yeah.
like thinking about thinking, right?
Yeah.
Stepping outside of ourselves and watching our own thought processes.
Exactly. And it turns out certain parts of our brain, like the prefrontal cortex and the cingulate cortex, they're really important for this. But here's the thing. When these areas are damaged, it messes with our ability to, well, update what we believe about anything, really, and that includes our vision. Yeah, so even if there are like alarm bells going off in our brain saying, hey, something's not right here, we might just totally miss them.
It's like those warning lights on your car dashboard, right? They could be flashing like crazy, but if you don't know what they mean, you might just keep on driving.
Perfect analogy. Our metacognitive abilities, that ability to think about our own experiences and perceptions, it can be surprisingly fragile.
So fascinating. And honestly, kind of humbling. But okay, so we've covered what anosognosia is, and we've touched on how it happens. But what's actually going on in the brain?
Yeah.
What's causing these weird, failures of visual metacognition?
Well, it's kind of like putting a puzzle together, Researchers are still figuring out all the pieces, but we are starting to see the bigger picture. And one important thing is that these failures, they can happen at different points in how our brains process what we see.
Okay, so walk me through it. Like, where does it all start?
So remember how we were talking about filling in? That thing where our brain fills in gaps in what we're seeing.
Right, like our blind spots. Or in, like, more extreme cases, Anton syndrome, where it's like their brains create this whole made-up visual reality.
Exactly. And with Anton syndrome, you often see this breakdown in something called reality monitoring. That's our brain's ability to tell the difference between what we're actually seeing and what's coming from inside, like memories or our imagination.
So their brains are basically getting tricked by their own, like, internal visual simulations, making them think they're seeing things that aren't really there.
You got it. And this actually connects to the role of memory in all of this. To realize something's wrong with our vision, our brains, they need to compare it to something, like what our vision was like before the problem started.
Ah, so if something's up with the parts of the brain that handle visual memory, it'd be like trying to notice if something's different in a room you've never even been in before.
Right, like you walk into a room and someone asks you, hey, is there a picture missing from that wall? But you've never seen the wall before, so how would you know? And that's another reason why, and it sounds weird, but sometimes it's easier to notice vision loss if you haven't lost it completely.
Because if you still have some normal vision, your brain has something to compare it to, like a before picture to compare to the after picture.
Exactly. It's like that internal reference point. Without it, our brain might not realize anything is wrong.
Makes sense. And it reminds me of something you mentioned earlier, how some people only realize their vision is messed up once they start to get some of it back.
Oh, yeah. That's really interesting. It suggests that as your vision starts coming back, even just a little, it can be enough for your brain to finally go, wait a minute, this isn't right. It's like it suddenly has something to compare to and realizes something's off.
Wow, that's wild. Okay, so we've got filling in and how important memory is. What about that expectation adaptation thing, that gradual adjusting to, worse and worse vision? How does that fit in?
Okay, so for that, we got to remember that our brains are basically prediction machines. They're always making these educated guesses about the world based on what's happened before, trying to figure out what we're going to see, hear, and feel next.
Right, like our brains are constantly running these simulations of reality in the background, trying to stay one step ahead.
Exactly. And usually that's a really good thing. It helps us understand the world and process all that information coming at us. But like a lot of stuff in the brain, this prediction system can also backfire.
Okay, I can already tell there's a but coming. How does it backfire?
Well, when those changes in vision are gradual, like they often are with things like glaucoma or AMD, our brains, they're adaptable, right? So they might start to adjust their predictions to match the fact that the information coming in is getting worse. It's like if you're listening to music and you slowly turn down the volume.
You might not even realize how quiet it's gotten until you turn it back up.
Exactly. That's kind of what can happen with vision loss. Our idea of what normal vision is, it gets messed up without us even knowing.
So basically our brains are kind of like gaslighting us about our own vision loss.
In a way, yeah. And that's why it's so important for people to know about these conditions. If you don't even know there's a problem, you might not get it checked out until it's really bad.
That's a good reminder that everyone, especially as we get older, needs to get their eyes checked regularly. early detection is key.
Totally.
This is all so much to think about, but it really makes you look at how our brains see the world in a whole new light. And speaking of seeing, I can't help but wonder, do these, visual metacognition failures, do they mean anything for other stuff too? What does it tell us about how self-aware we really are?
Such a good question, and it's something researchers are really trying to figure out. Because if we can be so unaware of things changing in how we see, you do start to wonder, what else are we missing? It's kind of a freaky thought, honestly.
It really is. Like, if our brains can do that with our vision, what else are they hiding from us?
Right. It brings up all these big questions about, like, consciousness, self-awareness, even free will. It gets pretty deep.
Whoa, now we are going down a rabbit hole. But before we get totally lost, let's come back to the brain for a sec. We've covered filling in, memory, and expectation adaptation. But what about metacognition itself?
Right. We talked a little about how damage to certain brain areas can mess with that ability to think about our own thinking.
Yeah, like that nobody's home thing. The warning signs are flashing, but there's no one there to receive them.
Exactly that. But here's the thing. Even in a perfectly healthy brain, our metacognitive abilities, they're not perfect. We all make mistakes, We misjudge our abilities. We think we know more than we do. We miss important stuff all the time.
Oh, absolutely. I think we've all had those moments where we thought we aced a test only to get our score back. And, oh, yeah.
Exactly. And that's where this idea of metacognitive inefficiency comes in. Basically, it's how good we are at judging how well we know something compared to how well we actually know it.
So someone who's really metacognitively efficient, they'd be good at, accurately assessing what they know and how well they can do something. And someone who's not, well, they might be a little overconfident.
Exactly. And, like a lot of cognitive abilities, this metacognitive efficiency thing, it's not like you either have it or you don't. It's more like a spectrum. Some people are just naturally better at it than others. Better at, judging their own knowledge and performance accurately.
So let's say just, for example, someone's kind of known for having these metacognitive slip-ups.
Yeah.
But it's like in one specific area of their life, like of their vision we were just talking about. Does that mean that they might be more likely to have those same kinds of slip-ups in other areas too? Maybe they're also the person who thinks they sound amazing at karaoke, even when everyone else is like, oof.
That is a fantastic question. And to be honest, it's something researchers are still trying to figure out. But there is some really interesting evidence that suggests, our metacognitive abilities might actually kind of carry over between different parts of our lives. Meaning, if you're always overconfident about one thing, you might be more likely to be overconfident about other stuff too.
So if I'm someone who constantly underestimates how long it's going to take me to finish a project, does that mean I'm also the person who's going to miss those early signs of vision loss?
It's definitely possible, and it just goes to show how important it is to be aware of our own thinking, to work those metacognitive muscles. The more in tune we are with how our minds work, the better we'll be at spotting those blind spots and catching those errors in our thinking, and ultimately, making better decisions in all parts of our lives.
So what you're saying is metacognition, it's not just some fancy neuroscience term. Mm. It actually matters for, how we learn, how we deal with challenges, even just how we interact with other people, right?
100%. And understanding how it works or how it can go wrong, well, that's important for everything, from education to healthcare to, just navigating everyday life.
This whole deep dive has been, wow. It really makes you realize how much we don't know about our own brains and how much they shape our experience of the world. Honestly, it's been a little humbling.
It's true. The brain is amazing, but it also has a way of reminding us that it has its limits. But, I think that's part of what makes it so fascinating to learn about.
Totally. So to everyone listening, the next time you feel like you've got it all figured out, remember anosognosia. It's a good reminder that even with something as basic as sight, our brains can still surprise us and challenge what we think we know. And really just encourage us to stay curious about the world and ourselves, in all its weird and wonderful complexity.